Thanks very much. Thanks for coming out so early. My name's Dylan Horvath. I run Cortex Design here in the city of Toronto. We're in the West End. We create physical products. We tend to create mostly electronic products and things where the human perception of that product is part of its value. We are very design focused in what we do, and we tend to work on things that are very challenging, that haven't been done before, market creating products. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most exciting projects we have ever done. We were chosen as a vendor for our client CloudDX to compete in the Qualcomm Tricorder XPRIZE Competition. How many of you are familiar with XPRIZE, the XPRIZE Foundation? Just a show of hands. Not too many. So SpaceX is one of the competitions that arose out of the XPRIZE Foundation, leading to the first commercial space flight. The XPRIZE Foundation's mandate is to push the boundaries of what can be done by the humanities and sciences. They create incentivized competitions that are intended to push the boundaries of what we can achieve today. So in summer of 2013, they announced the Qualcomm Tricorder XPRIZE Competition. The intent of this was to make a working tricorder, like from Star Trek, the medical tricorder that's able to diagnose human health conditions. And they had very clear criteria. 330 teams were entered in June of 2013, and the requirements were to have a continuous vital sign monitor, the ability to monitor all 5 human vital signs simultaneously, stream all of that data to a cloud-based system, diagnose 15 chronic health conditions, so conditions like tuberculosis, HIV, a huge number of different conditions, all done by one system. And it had to be very user-focused. So the intent was for a single person to be able to use this device by themselves with no doctor in the system. And another interesting requirement was that it had to be less than 5 pounds. The less than 5 pounds requirement really dictated how big the thing could be and how many devices you could use. And it was intended to focus this on the user and something that you could go buy as a doctor in a box from Walgreens sometime in the future. So these were the goals. In the spring of 2014, our client CloudDX had been shortlisted to one of 35 that were still in the competition. And that was the point that we engaged with them. And at that stage, in order to become a finalist, 50% of the mark was based, or 50% of the judging was based on the user experience. While CloudDX had a very strong medical background, they had an existing blood pressure cuff that was already cloud connected that would form the basis of the technology solution. They did not have any industrial designers, they didn't have any artists, they didn't have anyone that could visualize what this system might look like and how it was going to be used by the person that was using it. So this was initially what we came on to do, and we had a relatively tight project, and these were virtual renderings that we created of the solution. By late August of that same year, we got this email from the chief medical officer. It sounded like we were going to be out, but we were not, we were in. We had become one of 10 finalists at this stage, and this was really when the intense timeline began. We had 40 weeks now to make what we had sketched out virtually into something that was real. Time was not our friend. And XPRIZE also made it very clear that we were the underdogs in this competition. We were far behind the other 9 teams that we were competing against. Some huge companies were backed in this competition. One of the teams is in Taiwan. They're backed by HTC, the cell phone maker. Do you guys know BIOS? Like when a PC boots up, you get the BIOS boot screen. So the company that created that BIOS system is in India. One of the other teams is that company. There's a company in California that has $50 million in financing and had already won a crowdfunding, or had already been successfully crowdfunded to over several million dollars. So these were the people that we were competing against. At this stage, we really had nothing. So the first thing that we had to do was prototype what we had actually visualized so that we could start playing around with it. And at 34 weeks, we had something that you could actually take and play with in the real world. This is my friend Mandy, and also my yoga instructor. One of the first things that we realized when we started playing around with these devices, we wanted to walk through the story of how you would interact with this device, and having those physical products was essential for doing that. You may be able to see that the wearable portion is floating off her chest a little bit. Mandy is a small woman. Our photographer was a huge guy. When he put the wearable on around his neck, it snapped in two. That was one of the first things that we realized from those physical prototypes. When I first started putting together the slides for this presentation, my intent was to walk through all of the key milestones in the timeline. However, I realized this was going to take forever. We had a huge number of tasks to complete and the amount of time that we had, so I decided to narrow my focus a little bit for the presentation on just a few of the key challenges that we did have. One of the things was organization. So this was the structure that we fell into. Cortex became the project manager on this so that design could really drive all of the decisions. And the user experience and the overall product vision that we created was going to be the guiding principle that aligned all of the other teams. So we did have a number of other terrific teams, and they were spread throughout the world. Digital communication tools in this case were essential to be able to talk with everyone. We had a team in New Jersey, we had a team in California, we had a team in New York, and we had other teams that we were trying to add. There was a company called Valencell in North Carolina that had some very interesting technology that would fit in your ear to measure your heart rate, for example. That piece of technology was one of the most essential pieces for us to have in our prize competition. The way the wearable would work, the 5 human vitals that it measures are core body temperature, which is taken from inside the ear, your ECG, which is a measure of the electrical signal going to your heart, your respiration, your breathing rate, your blood pressure, and those, in order to derive blood pressure, you had to be able to take the delay of the time it takes between the electrical signal to fire to your heart and the resulting surge of blood that happens elsewhere in your body, in our case, the ear. By measuring that time delay very precisely, you can correlate that to blood pressure. The existing technology for measuring blood pressure is the cuff that you probably have seen, which inflates very uncomfortably, restricts the blood flow in your arm, and it's able to capture your systolic and diastolic pressure. However, for XPRIZE, we had to be able to monitor blood pressure continuously for 72 hours. Having that sort of experience on your arm was not going to work, especially while you were sleeping. So getting this technology in the ear to pick up those heart rate signals very precisely was a key piece of technology that had to be developed. Sometimes you do have to get on a plane, though, and travel to where your vendors are so you can meet face to face. I think it was January, I traveled to New Jersey to visit with the lab. The lab in New Jersey was going to be responsible for developing the biochemical markers that go on paper strips in order to detect some of those health conditions. And there were several pieces to this. So there was the paper strips that would that would react to blood and urine samples. There was the cartridge that would carry that strip. and allow you to prick your finger and dose it onto the paper strip. And then there was the reading technology, which would actually do the machine vision to recognize those biomarkers to a high degree of accuracy. At this trip, we realized that we could probably simplify quite a bit of the team. And some of the teams that were not reacting quickly enough, we were able to eliminate. And we brought on a couple of key partners here in Toronto as well. So Pivot Design Group was going to be responsible for the screen-based experience, and Propellerhead was responsible for coding those experiences. It was also really important for us to bring in some gaps in our skill sets internally at Cortex. So we had two key hires at this period, a couple of senior engineers that had a great deal of experience with bioengineering. So we brought those people in order to be able to do the things that we were not able to find vendors to do quickly enough. In the end, we ended up settling into silos of responsibility. This was not a designed team division. This was how things naturally formed as we added skills to the team. So we had a user experience design team. We had industrial design and mechanical engineering, apps and integration, 6 different teams. But in order to communicate between these teams at this kind of rate, we would seed those teams with the same people. So Joel was on 3 different teams. He was the lead on 1 and participated in another 2. Same with Jeff, same with myself. At 17 weeks, now we're about halfway through our timeline, this was the state of our wearable design. This wearable goes around the neck, as you saw with Mandy. And the earpiece picked up core body temperature and the pulse rate in order to get our blood pressure measurement. Now, that earpiece, we were not able to partner with any other company, and we had to take it on ourselves. So we were now 17 weeks to go, developing world-class technology, and this was our plan. So by the beginning of February, we had started the design, and by mid-March, it had been built, and we were through testing. One of the unfortunate things with that first design, this is the scale of those circuit boards. That's the circuit board sitting on my finger. It took me 2 hours to assemble this prototype under a microscope. We had 50 assembled prototypes to deliver for XPRIZE. This was not going to be achievable with this particular design. And in the end, when we had to assemble it inside that tiny little enclosure inside the ear, there were assembly issues that just made it impossible. These were the size of some of the circuit boards that we were dealing with. That little square in the bottom left corner is 1 millimeter. So that design failed, and we had to move on. We came up with a second plan. This was a more integrated circuit board design that was going to be quicker to assemble. 2 circuit boards that would fold on top of each other. And we started that design as soon as we realized we had to in about mid-March. We were getting really tight on our timeline right now. And without this piece, everything else would fail. Our entry was dead in the water. So unfortunately, the production schedule looked like it was going to end with us giving us about a week to test this. And this was still completely unproven. So we had a huge amount of risk at this stage. We tried to do what we could to reduce that risk. We found another vendor that was in the States that could build that same design. And so we had 2 vendors that were racing to complete this on time. This was the outcome of those circuit board designs. The top one was our Plan B. The second one was our Plan C. The first one actually was the one that worked really well. Plan C also had some manufacturing defects and was unusable. Now, because we knew that this was so critical, as these were getting built, we started on a Plan D. So we had 4 designs going in right from the outset. Plan D was a simpler design for the manufacturers to make, and so because it was simpler, it took less time to build, and we figured we were hedging our bets even further. In the end, it was Plan D that only took about 2 weeks to build, about a week to design, and that ended up being the one that went to the show. So these are the assembled earpieces now that we were building in late April. These kinds of challenges were experienced by the team across the board of all the devices that we had to build. So mid-March, we had 11 weeks to go. The base station that we were designing that would do the blood and urine-based tests, this was our design for it at 11 weeks. At 9.5 weeks, I was on my scheduled family vacation in Jamaica. It was an ill-timed trip for me, but one that I was not going to be able to get out of. So I was working virtually with our designers back in the office, and a relatively new hire had sent this version of the design down. I was extremely disappointed at this stage that this was how far we had gotten. The idea with this was the base station would clamshell around the blood and urine tests, close up like a clamshell, and the machine vision system would control that image capture in order to diagnose those conditions. However, this is not what I had in mind with a great user experience. Looks really clunky, it's ugly, the forms are not well resolved. 8 weeks ago, our studio lead took over and had begun detailing some new ideas. And this was the result at 7 weeks left. So we have a rapid prototyping machine in our office. We were able to print these prototypes out overnight once the design was done. And we came up with this idea of having the device itself control those physical interactions. So rather than asking the user to open up the IVD and close the IVD, this was all going to be done by motor control now, automatically through the application. So this was our first prototype. We had another big milestone with 7 weeks to go. Our production supervisor, Rick, had his first child. He was very excited about this, as we all were, but it was also like, oh boy, Rick's got a kid now. This is really going to kill our timeline. So I put him on a plane at 6 weeks left to go. He got on a plane, left his newborn child back in Toronto, and wife alone. We made sure that we got her some support. And we flew him to China for his first trip, where he landed into a monsoon. And I was looking for the brilliant strategy that I had provided to get him out of this and get him on the next trip, and I actually realized this was my advice to him at 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh, shitty. Anyway, things looked up from there, and he did get his job done. Having him there to supervise the prototyping was essential. Normally, we don't need to send someone to our prototyping partners in China to supervise things. They're quite excellent. But we had no room for error at this stage. So having him on the ground to be able to answer questions quickly probably cut 2 or 3 weeks out of our prototyping timeline. With 1 week left to go in the deadline, we had begun building all of the stuff. We were near finishing building all of the stuff back in Toronto. We were spending 16 to 18 hours a day building, testing, and commissioning all of these hardware devices. And this was a huge day for us. Shipping day out of Toronto. We were holding this FedEx guy hostage. We had some of his paperwork that he couldn't leave without hidden on one of the boxes. So he was waiting to find it as we were loading up the truck. So he just made it barely on time to his deadline off of the airport, and we shipped all of this stuff down to San Diego with 1 week left to go before our submission. We landed a team in San Diego. This team it was really time now for the software team to shine. Because the hardware was so last minute, they didn't have any live hardware to do their algorithms testing on. So the algorithms testing had to take place in San Diego. So Jeff in the background there and Sarah Matt leaning in with his beard. He's from Propellerhead. They were there to work, again, 18 to 20 hours a day to get all of the software completed, tested, commissioned. And we were there as support, and we were also there as guinea pigs. So we pretty much imported our entire production facility down to an Airbnb house in San Diego. And this was what it looked like, commissioning those systems. We had to come up with novel ways to test some of the conditions. If we were to test all of you today on what your blood oxygen level is, you would all probably have pretty normal blood oxygen levels. But we were going to have to diagnose bad blood oxygen levels too. So how do we do this? Well, we asked the vice president of the company to put a bag over his head and see what happens. So he had commercial blood oxygen level sensors on his fingers, and that was our gold standard. And then we're looking at the monitor to see how our system is reacting. Probably not ideal, but that's what we had to do. Here, Tony is not just providing some comfort to me late at night. He's also measuring how many breaths per minute I'm breathing in and out. And this is actually the gold standard way that doctors will measure your respiration. It's very error prone. Our system had to be able to diagnose that automatically, continuously throughout the day. And we do it without chest straps. It's done by monitoring the signals that are coming off your heart. If you look at your ECG strip over time, under ideal conditions, there is a swell, or there's sort of an ebb and flow in the amplitude of your ECG signal. And so that's what the algorithms are detecting. As you breathe in, the amplitude gets higher, and as you breathe out, the amplitude gets lower. So you can look for that carrier frequency. The challenge, of course, is this works really terrific in a lab. When you're walking around, when you're moving, all of the sensors on your body are in a dynamic state. That is a much, much more challenging problem. And we had blood tests to do, too. So again, vice president of the company, he was the guinea pig for this one. We had to collect blood samples and be able to test all of our IVD strips. So Sarah was monitoring here. And you can see in the background all of the base stations are sitting there commissioned on the shelves at Airbnb house number 2. This was the night before we had to deliver. We were physically exhausted. That's Joel, my studio lead, and Chelsea from Pivot Design. We have everything packaged. Everything's in the box and ready to go, but we're still a little trepidatious about what the outcome is going to be. But we pulled it off. This was what we ended up delivering. It was a fully resolved system that worked. The screen was used to interact with, like a doctor would interact with you. So as you start the app, it walks you through the experience of coming to a diagnosis. So it's asking you very basic questions. Hello, Dylan. What's your age? What's your height? What's your weight? Can you tell me a little bit about the symptoms that you may be experiencing? Do you have upper body pain, lower body pain? And as it walks you through this, it will lead you down diagnostic flows. Some of those diagnostic flows may lead you to a blood or urine test. So the base station is something that is used by the user. They're able to prick their finger, insert the blood test cartridge into that base station, and the system will know how long that test should develop. It inverts that cartridge and does an image capture of the result, and uses machine vision to understand what the result is. Vitality is the brand name of this entry. The wearable can do all 5 human vital signs. ECG is the electrical signal from your heart. HRV is heart rate variability, one of the things that it has to detect and diagnose. Core body temperature, again, is from the inner ear, one of the gold standard locations on your body where you're able to take core body temperature. The other 2, one is your mouth and the other is up your ass, and we thought that was a bad human experience for a wearable. Blood oxygen level is off your ear as well. Respiration is the derived measurement of that ECG signal. And continuous blood pressure measurement, really the most incredible and most difficult part of this project is the ability to measure blood pressure continuously. That cannot be done by any commercial system currently. So it will be interesting to see what kind of health metrics we're able to pull out of these systems, because we're going to have data that we have never had before. Part of the interesting thing about it being cloud connected, all of these health metrics now can be stored on servers that have massive amounts of populations metrics, and things like continuous blood pressure measurements. We don't know what kind of data we can mine out of that to just algorithmically detect chronic health conditions with no further interventions. This device I haven't even mentioned was one of the things that we also had to develop. We called it the spirotoscope. It's essentially a wireless camera that allows you to look inside your ear at a highly magnified level and look for ear infection. So there are existing otoscopes out there that are used for this. This is the only one that can be used by a single person. You can also image other skin conditions. The tube that's in the middle, you blow through that tube, and the response to your breath enables the system to tell a lot about your lung capacity, and it can diagnose chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, COPD, or COPD as we came to call it. And this is the final wearable as well, or the person using it with the app. And as you can see, we really used that initial visualization, that initial design, to be able to achieve what we achieved here. So this one differed from the initial one in that it was flexible and posable as well. So it's not floppy, but it's flexible. And you can conform it to your body shape. So this would fit on Mandy and our photographer Ro, and everybody that was in between them. So I thought it was important to share, what this really meant. Like, if you're considering doing an XPRIZE competition, what are you in for? How many hours? How many tasks? We use a system called Reich, which is a cloud-connected task management software to control all of the different tasks. So some of those metrics that were out of that system. This was the number of hours spent and the cash spent on a monthly basis. So near the deadline of the submission date, we were spending nearly $300,000 a month on across the board on vendors, on parts, on labor. And by the end of it, we had 520 different tasks that we were tracking and completed. Over 6,000 hours, not including my time. So we could probably add another digit to that. I'm guessing around 7,000 hours. We built over 200 prototypes to get to this final system. And the total cash outlay at the end of June was about $1.46 million. And we have since spent more. So the latest news with this prize has not been awarded. This is still a live competition, and there are still tasks left to complete. We've integrated a new technology called GMR with a team that is based out of Stanford in California. And we're able to detect some of these health conditions very, very quickly with microfluids of blood and urine, which goes to improving reliability and also improving the user experience, because collecting a lot of blood is not really a fun thing for anybody. So this is our upcoming deadlines. By the summer, we're going to be completing human trials. And by late August, we're responsible for final delivery of a new and improved system. So we're still very much in the middle of it. That's the end of my presentation. If I wanted to stress a few things that I think made this project successful for us, Starting with a strong vision of what it is that you're trying to achieve was essential for us to be able to align all of the teams with a common product vision and a common goal. Anytime you would get down a wormhole of some engineering problem, there was still the physical prototype to refer back to, and that helped us make decisions and create priorities. Failing fast, absolutely essential when you're doing prototyping. I'm sure Paul can attest to how quickly you need to fail in order not to spend a lot of money. So failing fast, not just with the parts, but also with partners. Sometimes partners don't work out, and when they're not working out, getting them out of that team as quickly as possible is just as important as bringing the proper team members in. Knowing when your team is being infected by a poor culture, and knowing what kind of culture you want to build as part of an award-winning team is certainly what helped us get to that deadline on time. Thank you very much. If anybody wants to look at more information on this particular prize, on our website we have a small documentary that was shot by Ryan Duffy for the Huffington Post. It's a little mini doc that's on YouTube, and the link to it is off our blog. Our website's www.cortex-design.com, and I am certainly looking forward to any questions you guys might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dylan. We do have time for just a few questions.